everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Unscripted and Unchoreographed. I'm your host, Niamh, and we have my co-host, Sarah, and the wonderful Bellamy, extraordinaire artist. Thank you for being here.
No, thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
We are very excited to have you. How did you get into the arts?
So I was thinking about this. I don't know if it was at any point like a decision so much as it was a slow descent. I was born in the UK and attended school there for a few years. Part of schooling when you're like that young in the UK is you do a play every term or every second term. Because I went to like a non-denominational school, as they are in the UK, secular or mostly. I think my first like big role was as the 10-headed demon in the story of Diwali. I had balloons with different facial expressions around my head, 9 of them, to make me into a 10-headed demon. And I remember someone saying to me, "You got this role because you speak in front of others and you're not scared." And I guess I've never really been afraid of talking in front of people. That all changes later on in the story. I did that, and then I moved to Wexford as a child and got involved in dance school and local community youth drama. We did musicals, and then I went into Wexford town and was in a group called Oyster Lane Theatre Company. They did a big musical every year and I loved doing them. But the only other career option I considered for myself was theoretical physics, because I really enjoyed learning about like electrons in physics for Leaving Cert, and I was like, yeah, maybe I could do that. But aside from that, I wanted to do theatre. I initially really wanted to be an actor. I did all the auditions for all the drama schools in the UK and in Ireland. There was a moment where there was a choice. I got into an acting school, but I also got into a drama and theatre course in Dublin. I had to decide whether I wanted to just be an actor or to do everything involved in drama and theatre. I chose the latter and studied the 4-year bachelor's in drama and theatre in Trinity. And during that time, I had a really weird experience on a show, not necessarily in the college, but it was during my time in college, that left me with massive stage fright. And to this day, I still can't get up on stage if I'm like trying to act. But what I also discovered was that I really, really loved directing and I loved devising. When I graduated, I went out into the world to do primarily horror genre theatre. It was something I was really interested in doing. So then I worked kind of professionally as a production manager for a number of years, tried to gather as much knowledge as I could, and directed a couple of interesting site-specific pieces, like doing the most random projects, honestly. I was doing mostly production management and some directing for a number of years, and then I landed the lap of Jody O'Neill, who's a writer. She'd written a play, What I Don't Know About Autism, and it was playing in the Peacock in the Abbey in 2021. They needed somebody to operate their captions from backstage, who could come in for like 2 weeks before the show went up and just sit in rehearsal and like operate the captions on a laptop and learn the timing of the show. And I love operating. That's like my secret love. If I could be a director but also be an operator, I'd love that. I really love doing it because there's like a rhythm to a show that you get to know that I really enjoy. And so I operated captions, and one night backstage, Jody said to me, "What do you want to do? Like, is this what you want your job to be?" And I said, "Well, I really want to be a director." And she was like, "Great." And then 2 weeks later, she emailed me and was like, "I've got a show. Would you direct it?" I was like a bit confused, I think, because nobody had ever, I guess, expressed that much trust in me so quickly. And I was directing her, which was like, that's Jody O'Neill, famous playwright. That's intimidating. And I did direct her, and then I directed Eleanor in the same role for the same show, which is a show called Yellow, which is been going around for years and continues to do so. But the experience of working on What I Don't Know About Autism gave me a new perspective. I think coming out of a very intense theatre course and coming out of musical theatre, amateur dramatics background, where it feels high stakes, very tight turnaround on everything. It all moves very, very fast. and working on something where there was time for people to be people instead of just be actors and crew. There was time for everybody to express what they needed and the provisions were in place. So that kind of changed how I thought about theatre. So from then on, I've been working as a director and facilitator and a bit of an access consultant, making work which embeds accessibility for disabled cast and crew and patrons. That's kind of been the last 3 or 4 years. I've just been like completely dedicated to accessibility because it's something that I love. I find it fascinating and a really rich ground for getting creative with things. So yeah, so I think that's how I got here.
Did you have drama classes in school?
I think it was like part of our syllabus, yeah. This was in junior school, so you do like infants, and in juniors you do a nativity every Christmas, and we did some other ones. I think it was part of it. Like we had assembly every morning where the school would sing songs. Like they'd put them up on that screen projector, you know, those old plastic sheets on the projector, and the lyrics would be up on the wall and we'd sing every morning for assembly. And yeah, and we did plays.
So then when you came to Wexford, was that like a real shock? Were you like, where's the drama here, lad?
Well, we did do some drama classes in my national school in Wexford. What I found, I think, most interesting when I moved, the singing we did in school was all religious singing, and the singing we did in church we weren't allowed to do, only the choir were allowed to do. And like, I'm not a religious person. I went to Catholic schools because that's what there was in Wexford at the time. I never had any issues being a non-religious person in these schools. It was interesting to go from a place where like we sang these secular fun songs every morning. I still remember a lot of them. There's like a spring chicken song that I sing every spring to my partner. It drives him bonkers. Yeah, singing was just like, and acting was part of it.
What was the rehearsal room process like for your past shows like Yellow? And also, what kind of drew you to directing?
That's interesting. Okay, what drew me to directing? I mean, I don't know. I had a therapist tell me I was a control freak. I think that's part of it. I do think that's part of it. I'm a bit of a micromanager. Every time I see a show, there isn't a thing I wouldn't change and there isn't a thing I wouldn't copy. That's something I learned from Dan Colley, actually. Every time you see a show, work out what you'd steal, like what you'd do. And also learn to differentiate between, is it a bad show or is it just a show I wouldn't make? Which I think is a really important question to ask yourself when you exit a theatre. I'm a micromanager, but I'm also a visual thinker. I spent an awful lot of time very interested in facial expressions and body language analysis. That was an interest that occurred kind of naturally. I'm interested in it as a non-exact science because it's completely non-exact. I know it's used in like legal systems, which it really shouldn't be. But I found it interesting because I would sit and watch videos of people and observe how I felt about them. I also had this kind of magic trick when I was in college that I could predict who would hook up on a night out. And at the time I thought I was just magic. I thought I was just really intuitive. I've since learned that that's a byproduct of masking. I'm hyper vigilant on people's facial expressions and their body language. I always have been since a very young age. I'm really tuned in to what people around me are feeling because I'm making these observations. I don't notice that I'm making those observations. I'm just picking them up. That's what interests me about directing, is that when I direct people, I want to believe them. Trust them in what they're saying, or maybe not them as an actor, but the character. Like, it's got to be true, right? So, or if it isn't, why are they lying? Do we want the audience to know they're lying? How do we tell them they're lying? I've been known to get very particular about, like, your eyes are too wide. Close your eyelids a little on that line. Don't raise your eyebrow. So I can get quite particular about little things in the body language, just because that's how I think I look at everyone when I go about my day, which is exhausting in many ways, being like a hyper vigilant masking person. And so I guess when I rehearsed Yellow with Eleanor, we did a run of rehearsals for that. And that was right at the time where I was like asking for permission more than I was directing. I think. I was conscious of the fact that it was a script with immense power, despite being 11 pages long. We joke that it's the play where nothing bad happens and everyone's happy all the time. It isn't. It's a light-toned play, but it's not unserious. There's a moment in the play where the main character, it's a one-person show, something goes wrong for her. And it's a big deal. I tiptoed around what that would look like. And I was looking for permission from other people to say that I did it the right way. Because it's a moment at which a character who's not specifically described as autistic in the script, but I think is autistic, has a disruption that it has really big stakes for her. But it's also a moment where everything changes and things, not that they were bad before, but they get good in a different way afterwards. And that was like a really scary thing to direct, because it's like, I don't want to direct a meltdown. I don't really want to do that. I don't think many people I know want to see that. How do I do that safely if I am to do that? How do I communicate what that's trying to communicate and the gravity of the situation without going to extremes where this relaxed performance suddenly becomes very loud and very overwhelming for the audience as well as for the performer? And we settled on an idea, and after the first run of it, an audience member came up and said, I like the way you did the meltdown. And that stuck with me, because I was like, great, I did it. I did it right. Then we had another 2 weeks to rehearse it, like a year later. In the meantime, I'd start this bursary research, and someone had said the words artistic truth to me, and I was like, wow, that's something to make my whole personality about. Because I was scared of directing an actor to portray how they felt a meltdown would go, or how I felt a meltdown would go, based on lived experiences. That's unsafe, and so I was scared of doing that, and so we didn't. How does the character feel? I didn't consider that at all the first time, or maybe I did, but not in the way that I needed to. And so we did another 2 weeks at it. One day, when I was working with Eleanor in the rehearsal room, who was the actor, we realised that this character is so quiet and so tucked away that she wouldn't make a sound and she wouldn't do anything. She would sit and let the moment happen to her. And that's what we did. And I left that rehearsal feeling like I'd made a decision, and I didn't care if it was the right decision, because it's a decision I stand by. I've engaged my morals, my principles, I've thought about this, and I've come to a conclusion, and this is it. And I love it. And I think it's like a brilliant moment. I mean, Eleanor is giving it everything, like incredible performer, and it's such an honor to work with her. There's no one right fit for everyone, so take some time with it yourself. Think about where you're coming from, what your experiences tell you, what your principles tell you, and then you can come to this truth, artistic or otherwise. That's the truth of the character. That was really important for me. That moment was one of those rare moments where I guess I felt like a director, because I think a lot of the time I don't. I feel like a strange floating brain in a room that's like putting pieces together. I'm also known for kind of popping a squat. I won't sit on the floor or on a chair. I sit in a squat with my fingertips pressed together over my nose, and I stare at what's happening and I react audibly. Someone asked me, how do you make a performance relax? Like, how do you train the actors to deal with the fact that a relaxed performance has like noises and things going on in the audience? And I was like, I think they just kind of get used to it, because I'm there and I'm going, no, yes. And I'm clicking my pen and I'm flipping my pages and I'm scribbling down notes like somebody possessed, like move when I'm directing. I don't sit behind a table. And so I think they just get used to me, and that prepares them for every realm of relaxed. Well, not everyone. We've had some unique ones, and yeah, that's joyous as well. In 2023, I got a bursary to build a holistic methodology for disability inclusive practice. I wanted to spend a year engaging with what an accessible theatre world could look like from every angle I could get my hands on. So from a venue, from the union, from a writer, from a director, from my own practice as a director and facilitator and consultant in that time. When I started work on that, I was very, very hard on myself. I got this bursary. This means I have to write a book. It was like, how do I write a book about something that isn't done yet? How do I begin to talk to people about something that, like, I'm 2 years into at the time? I'm new to this. I feel this like responsibility. I also feel this sense of like my experiences as a person in disability activist spaces to that point had been really focused on intellectualizing. And so I sat down and I wrote this piece that was to myself, really. It was like supposed to be an opener. Why are you doing this? Why do you care? If the answer isn't because of empathy, you're wrong. That was really interesting, and I showed it to someone and they were like, that's tough though, because we're demanding moral perfection on the first page, and it's a page, and some people don't want to read a book about this. Some people want to learn in a different way. You don't need to do a book. I think you need to do something else. And I was like, you're so right. I continued my work across that year. And at the end of it, all these interactions I'd had myself where I was scared of saying something wrong or doing something wrong, those interactions were faced with other people looking at me and being like, am I doing it wrong? You've got to tell me there's got to be one right answer. And I realized that the biggest thing that's standing in the way from my perspective in that moment about making forward steps in terms of accessibility was fear and guilt were stopping people from doing anything. They stopped me from doing anything. I realized that it doesn't really matter. I mean, it does if you're endangering someone. But if you're trying something new and it doesn't work and you look for feedback and people say, that didn't work for me because of these reasons. If we just try to protect our own egos from accepting that sometimes we are going to get it wrong, we're never going to try because it's safer not to. It's funny because like my work, I say, I work with disabled and neurodivergent artists, and there's like two groups there. That's not how it is at all. Everyone is so unique, and the specificity and uniqueness of the disabled lived experience is what makes it really interesting and fruitful, that I can watch a play about someone else's lived experience of their disability and not relate to a bit of it. But that doesn't matter. That's what art is. That's what we do with other theatre. So why are we trying to make this into one thing? Why does it have to be one answer to every question? We have to accept that we're going to get it wrong, and we have to keep trying anyway. It's interesting because I think this came up in a working group I'm a part of. Someone asked, how do you know how you're perceived in a working room? And I was like, God, I don't have a clue. If I can get into a rehearsal room with another director just to watch, that's all I want all the time, is to watch other directors work, because that adds to the multitude of perspectives I want to bring every time. I'm trying to look outside myself now. I use a lot of references, so like music or even memes. Anything in the culture, because if I want to explain to an actor how I want them to deliver something, my brain runs through the inventory of everything I've stored in here. And sometimes it's a line in a song, or sometimes it's a picture, a word, meme, or a TikTok, and I have to show them and tell them this is what I want. And I found that very fruitful with the people I've worked with. I guess when I was in college, there was which school of directing do you fall into? Stanislavski or Mamet? I definitely would have sided with Mamet. When I'm directing, I want actors to feel that their experience in the rehearsal room is as much a useful resource to the performance as the direction I'm giving them. It's not about drawing on personal past trauma or past joy, that it's about accessing that emotion authentically, but in a way that's really safe. I don't like the method acting method, but I don't think I'm alone in that. I think there's been a real kind of rejection of that lately. I think for actors, they're there to do a job. So I have to make sure their workplace is safe. I'm the person who's supposed to make the final calls. That's something I think about a lot. But also just enjoy it. When you work in theatre, whether that's like full-time, freelance, part-time, you do it like as an amateur, you're doing it for joy or for some experience that you can't get elsewhere. And I don't ever want that to stop. But at the same time, it is a job, you know? So it's a tightrope walk between them all. I think years as a production manager have given me a handy skill set in that I know how the lights work. I can communicate that in words that are appropriate for a lighting designer versus appropriate for an actor. I was talking about this to someone recently. People say director's job is to communicate, but I think that's a very unnuanced version of what it is. It isn't just to communicate, because if I were to communicate everything in my head before thinking about it, it's useless information and it's confusing. But if I am to frame and facilitate conversations that are relevant and appropriate to the people I'm talking to, then I'm communicating properly. So I'm not going to tell an actor that we're running DMX down that bar, or I'm not going to tell an actor that the subwoofers are under the thing. Well, maybe I would, I don't know, depending on the project, right? The same way I wouldn't tell a lighting technician, like, exclusively, this scene should feel like a summer's day. I will tell them that, but I'll also tell them something else, like I need it bright at this spot or whatever. It's about framing and facilitating those conversations as much as it is about communicating. And like, you do have to empty your head sometimes, but meaningful communication is better than just communication, right? It's not something I'm perfect at all. Like, this is something I'm just working towards. And I guess I don't mean to sound kind of condescending to anyone. I just want to make sure that I'm giving them accurate and relevant information. Because theatre tends to run on quite a tight pace, we all tend to be a bit exhausted by the time shows actually come around. I don't want to belabor that process for anybody, basically. That's something I feel strongly about.
I think as well, though, because you have so much experience in all these different areas, that's really useful for a director, because they are the person who overall is making a lot of the decisions. So if you understand the lighting technician needs a minute, there's more of an understanding there. Patience, is that the right word?
Yeah, it's like shorthand. It's easier to communicate with people. I've been on both ends of it. I've been an actor and a director when people have said things to me that I don't know every finicky thing about a lot of the tech that goes on in theatre, but I've been on either side of it. I've been in the lighting box when things have been asked to be changed and we've been like, well, no, there's no lamps there, so there's no light there. Once you've done a bit of someone else's job, you just have a base level of knowledge. It gives you that understanding enough to try and make everyone's life a little easier. And I think the director and the production manager and stage manager, maybe the producer, have the power to do that, right? To make everyone's life a little easier. Why not make the working day run smoother? I did write a thesis at the end of my degree. Here's a fun fact about me. I actually have it on a shelf around me somewhere, and it's about punk, because I'm very into punk. It was about the performativity of punk music. It's all connected, actually. That's the joy. I love horror films. I've been very invested in the punk subculture for many years. When it came time to write a thesis about performance, I was like, I'm going to write it about punk. In the UK, from 1970 to 1977, I'm going to talk about feminism, worship and religion, and socio-economic kind of class divide. But at the same time, I was really interested in horror films, and like my final show I did in my degree was a horror show that was based on a horror story from Wexford. And there's a great joy in difference, just accepting that we're all a bit different, and that the horror space has given disabled people to see themselves on screen where they don't normally see themselves. Unfortunately, that's often in the role of villains. Some really interesting work online about the demonization of disability in horror, which I think is something really interesting. But I also see myself there, and I see myself in punk acts. And so I was working on a show for the last 2 years that was in Cork Midsummer Festival. It's called Home Sweet Home. And I was working with a group of artists down there from Susha Inclusive Arts organisation who are based out of Horizons, which used to be Coke Foundation. When we started working on that show, I was brought in just as a co-lead artist to direct whatever they wanted, whether that be a film or just kind of facilitate workshops and see what ideas the group came up with. And they wanted to do a show about protesting. And they wanted to do a show where they got on stage with a megaphone and yelled at the government. The staff of the organisation, I think, weren't really expecting that. And so we did. Preceding weeks to the show happening, I really understood why the show felt so joyful to me, because people were saying it's very emotional and we're like coming out in tears. And I was like, this is joy, surely. Finally screaming from the rooftops. This is like catharsis. And I realized that it was punk. It was a punk show. It was about protest. It was like tie-dye and paint splatters and stitched together. And I started describing the show like a protest quilt because I find them like endlessly fascinating. So protest quilts where a group of activists come together and each stitch a small square that becomes a large quilt in aid of something. And I realised that that's what the show was. It was a protest quilt of everyone in the room's experiences, lived experiences of disability, their opinions, political, personal, the colours they liked, the songs they loved. It was so much of them in every single aspect of the show that it became in its entirety this colourful explosion of things that fit together even though they shouldn't. That's why I loved it, because it was punk. It was a protest quilt and it was really radical.
Could you explain what is an access consultant or an access rider?
An access consultant is a person and an access rider is a piece of paper that when a theatre show wants to be more accessible, they may reach out to someone like myself to come in to see the show maybe in rehearsal. Or it might be the case that the show is already up and happening. We tend to prefer earlier in the process to have a look at the show and advise on what accessibility tools could be worked in and where. These tools could be anything from like an ISL interpreter, an audio describer, captions, where the captions might be on the stage, on the set. Build a visual guide or accessibility guide or social story for the show that can be issued for audiences. Basically just there to answer people's questions around building access into their shows. And the reason I say consultants refers earlier is because I'm very taken with this idea of creatively embedded access, which is about taking accessibility tools and embedding them in your production in a creative way. We don't have to settle for an ISL interpreter just standing to the side of the stage. If most of the action in the play is happening on the other side of the stage, are we actually distancing deaf and hard of hearing audiences from being able to engage then? So how can we bring the ISL interpreter into the play? How can we make the captions exist in the world of the play? Why are they there? Fun creative stuff, actually. You get to make a lot of creative decisions. That's something that I really like and feel is beneficial to audiences, but to the art as well. I mean, what greater joy is there than getting to try something new? Maybe the captions are on the ceiling. Why are they there? What are we doing? What's the world of the play? It gets way more creative then. An access rider is a piece of document. It's like a rider that bands or touring shows will issue that details kind of all their technical requirements. An access rider is that, but for a person, and it details your accessibility requirements. So your working hours, what kind of environments you enjoy working in or can work in. Do you need transport? What kind of transport? Do you like arriving early? Can you take phone calls? Do you prefer emails? Do they have to be voice note? It allows you to detail your access needs in a way that allows you to prioritize the needs, communicates the wants and really don't wants. And so you issue that at the start after you've been hired. You might have a discussion with the team about like who has access to your access rider. Sometimes it's not necessary for everybody to see it, and sometimes you don't want them to. But dissemination of that information around a team you're going to be working with can be really useful. So you don't have to do that self-advocacy work or try to communicate to someone that it's loud in here, it's that there are two conversations happening at the same time and I can't hear you. You don't have to do that in the moment, because that's been taken into account. And the schedule and all the making of the theatre should reflect that, should show back to you that they've read your access rider and that they respected it and that they're following it.
I had heard of nudity riders, which are to do with intimacy coordination. And then I heard about access riders and I was like, this could be useful. I wondered, should it just be standard in the industry for each individual to have an access rider, and maybe that include their preferences on intimate scenes?
I'm not sure. That's a really interesting question. I mean, I see in ways how that's a positive step, in that it would normalize us acknowledging people as people and not actors as talking props, which is something I hate. But at the same time, I think they can't lose their specificity. I think that's what's important about an access rider, is that while I mentioned preferences when I was discussing it there, really it's about needs. You can't work without these things. And I think that needs to be given its gravity and its specificity in what it is. So I don't know. That's a really interesting question, and that's something for me to puzzle over.
When you're working as a consultant, you're coming in and you're making it more accessible for people, or making it relaxed, or you're having interpreters and subtitles. When I think of that, I think that's more for a play or a musical. But for me, coming from a dance background where there is only solely movement, are there things, or what are the things you can do to make a dance piece more accessible, or do you have to? I don't think I've ever been to a relaxed dance performance.
Absolutely. No, that's like fascinating. I've never worked on a dance piece so far. Well, so far. I'm aware of some really excellent practitioners who are kind of working in the field. There's Inclusive Dance Cork and Maeve Kelleher, and a brilliant choreographer called Aine Pavon, who are down in Cork. Their approach to building work, I guess, would be more accessibility for the performers and crew, but their approach is like deeply empathy-led in my experience, or at least I found it empathy-led. I found it very like kind. I guess it's like the limits are your creativity, right? You could do anything. You could add captions to a dance piece to describe the sounds of the dancers moving on the floor, how their feet sound. You can play with like the size of those captions and the color of those captions to dictate who's making what noise, and how the captions come in to view if they like jump onto screen or appear slowly. I guess that's something interesting. In my experience, like you're talking about dance pieces without words. Yeah. So I don't know if there would be space for ISL. It's a really interesting piece of work by Leanne Quigley, who is a performer and activist and general legend who I admire so deeply, who did a piece a couple of weeks ago in the project called A Softer Kiss. And Leanne is deaf and uses ISL. There were parts of the piece that were described by Amanda Coogan, who was directing, as ISL poems, and they had kind of movement involved in them. It was a phenomenal piece of work. It becomes like really interesting puzzle solving, right? Where you have to put yourself into the mind of every audience member and how they see what you're presenting to them. In the show Home Sweet Home, we had a unique dilemma. The show had embedded ISL interpretation, it had embedded captions, and it had embedded audio description provided by a character on stage. And when it came to the musical number, because there were two musical numbers, the character on stage was getting up and singing the lyrics, you know, doing the singing choreography of the musical number. The ISL interpreter is interpreting the lyrics, and the captions are of the lyrics. So where's the audio description gone? And how do we make it fit? And so I puzzled over this. I had the thought, and like whether it was a total success, I don't know, because I haven't gathered that data yet. But I had the thought that because we had some voiceover audio description in moments where it was kind of coming from elsewhere, if that voiceover audio description was provided in the opening 8 bars of the song, describing the movements of the choreography, and it described them to the beat of the music, so that the members of the audience who were relying on audio description could hear the sounds to the tempo, to the beat of the music, and that would build that image for them. That also could then be captioned. Then I had to go to the choreographer and say, I need this dance to be describable in 2 lines that fit to 8 bars of music, right? So that was really interesting. Like, that project was a rare and excellent one in so many ways, because we had so long to work on these things that we could have those conversations as we were going and really build it in there. But that was fun, and I'd like to try it again. I want to try that again and see what happens next, because I'm interested in at the moment in making a play that's like a musical symphony built out of stimming movements. I want that to be accessible, so I have to go away and figure out what on earth have I gotten myself in for. I'm very excited.
I cannot wait to see that.
It's going to be called Stimphony. I guess should be included in this podcast. I tend to take the world in good faith. I mistakenly presume that everybody knows where I'm coming from when I just talk and like understands things that I'm saying. I struggle to lie, and that includes like lie by omission. So I struggle to not say how I'm truthfully feeling in any moment. That's something that I've encountered as really interesting in an artistic practice, but also in like a conversational practice. I'll come hard with an opinion one day and then 2 days later be like, yeah, I don't feel that strongly about it anymore, because in the moment something was like firing off for me, and most of my job is getting my thoughts in order. I always say I approach the world in good faith and I expect it to take me in good faith, and it doesn't, because like people come with their own life, and that's cool, and I'm fine with that. But it presents some interesting dilemmas for me as a person, and particularly when Niamh said to me, oh, would you like to come on this podcast? I want to make sure that I don't misrepresent anyone's feelings, but at the same time, the only person's feelings I'm in control of is my own. And so, yes, I guess this is by way of a disclaimer. Everything stated in this podcast is purely my opinion. It does not reflect the opinion of anyone else I've mentioned, nor anyone I've worked with.
I have been listening to Chris Iddy Hidgy Chatter obsessively for the last week, and because you mentioned it before, Al, if you're comfortable talking about masking in the arts industry, if you're comfortable with saying your experience.
I think a lot of things actually about masking in theatre, but most of them are personal and difficult. For me, the stakes are higher. So I might be able to get through the day that is harder for me because there's too much noise, or people talking over each other, or I haven't had a break, or I haven't seen the sunlight, or I've had to work over my working hours. I might be able to get through it, but the people I'm working with don't see the consequences. So when I leave and I go home, I feel the consequences. Often on my own. I'm very lucky to have like a loving and kind partner. I think partners of people who work in the arts are very patient generally and kind. He knows how to help in those moments. But I've worked on projects where I haven't been able to communicate after a work day what I even need. And yet, when I go in the next morning, headphones on, getting to the venue, as soon as someone from the team is in front of me, I'm like, okay, here's the schedule. We're doing this, this needs to go there, they need to go there. Because that's masking. I think there's a lot to be said about the safety of masking. Sometimes it's safe to mask. Like sometimes it's safer for me to mask than to unmask. The challenge is to find out and differentiate between when I'm doing it because it's safer or when I'm doing it because it's habit. A lot of the time it's habit. At least I think so. I don't know. It might not be. It might be that my brain is picking up on things that aren't safe. I think that's going to be something I continue to figure out over my career. There are spaces I've worked where I've definitely been able to unmask and relax, and God, that feels good. So I'm going to keep seeking those spaces out. But sometimes it's useful And sometimes it's like a tool I can use to get through something. But generally, I'd advocate for a way in which we don't have to be alone at the end of the day suffering the consequences of having to mask too hard for too long. The fallout from that, like, it's not even just mental fallout, like, it's physical fallout. I was working on something a few weeks ago that when I got home one day, I was covered in like a red rash all over my body. Went down once I'd slept 8 hours, but like the physical toll on my body is something that other people don't see because there's no space for them to see that when you're already masking around them when it doesn't feel safe. I would hope there will be less of in the future. But to be honest, like, I'm so early into my journey of even understanding what an unmasked owl looks like. Earlier in this conversation, I mentioned how most of the time I don't feel like a director, I feel like a floating brain in a rehearsal room, and I'm like scribbling notes and I'm crouching and I'm clicking my pen and reacting. That's me unmasked, I think. I'm not sure. I'm on a journey of self-discovery. But when I'm directing actors, I don't think about me at all. I don't think about my body. I don't process how I'm feeling. I just process what's happening in front of me in a focused way that I don't often get the opportunity to do. Most of the world kind of passes me by in a blur. It allows me to connect with this part of myself. That's what I'm aiming for always, is that feeling. That, but maybe with a touch of consciousness of what my body feels like. Sometimes if you're squatting for too long, your legs start to hurt. But you know, that kind of real authenticity that comes out of me when I'm directing, that is present in my body when I'm directing, is a sense of freedom that I want to keep looking for.
For our final question, if you would like to see the government change anything in the arts in Ireland, if you had a magic wand, what would you like to see?
I have so many answers to this. Basic income for artists would be great. I know the BIA scheme has been happening. The government specifically. I think there needs to be specific measures to redress the inequality in theatre. There's like a difficult line to walk there. Something I think I touched on briefly in a previous workshop about like positive discrimination versus equity. I would like to see equitable measures be enforced through our funding bodies. I don't think it's good enough that a show runs for 2 months and has one relaxed performance or one ISL performance. And I don't know what's going to change that, if not a requirement from the funding bodies on productions to provide access. That is one thinking, definitely, because of the systems in place, accessibility can be expensive. You have to pay the interpreter, you have to pay the audio describer, you have to rent the equipment. And I know that that's maybe an unkind thought to my fellow artists and companies, that they should be footing the cost of this, or you know, that it's part of what they should be providing. But I think if the funding can cover it, then that should be a requirement. And I think that has to be seen as an equitable change to the industry, top down. It's more just an initial thought of coming from a place of frustration, I guess. Because as we always say, sometimes deaf people have jobs and lives and they can't make it to the Tuesday matinee, which is the only show that's ISL interpreted. We can't keep demanding that of people because we're pushing disabled people out of the arts by doing this. We're not letting them see theatre, let alone work on it. Another thing is, and I know that this is in the middle of a process at the moment, but the way disability allowance interacts with your pay as an artist is a whole difficult situation. And that's something that I know that the people who need to know are aware of, are looking at the moment, which is great. And aside from that, what do I want to see more of in theatre? I want to see people take risks. I want to see something bonkers and new. When funding is scarce and we're stuck in this kind of system of we have to sell the tickets, the margins are so tight. People are scared to take risks then. I understand, of course, but I want to see some more theatre that takes risks. And even if I come out of it being like, that was completely bonkers and I don't agree, at least it makes me feel something. I want to feel something about the theatre I see. I want to feel strongly about it. I don't want to just feel like it was a passing fancy. We can do really interesting things, and we can take risks. Or I'd like to hope we can take risks. But obviously I understand, of course, why people are more likely to make a more commercially viable piece of theatre at the moment. But I'd like to see more risks taken, I think. I'd like to see really, really weird theatre.
Thank you very, very much, Al. That was incredible.